let's proceed with that. Obviously, at the end of last year, GT Le Mans went away. And with that came the evolution or the invention of the GT Daytona Pro category. We're about 2/3 through the season. Just kind of curious as to what your thoughts are. Has that worked, replacing GT Le Mans with GTD Pro in terms of competition, in terms of fan interest?
I think it really has, Greg. I mean, I think if you talk to a lot of the big manufacturers going back to the GT Le Mans days, manufacturers like BMW, they didn't want to spend the enormous amounts of money that it took to build a bespoke chassis to compete in that championship. They want to really be able to use their customer chassis, the one that's being used on the global stage to compete in IMSA for the top prize. So I think what it's done, we were down to a couple of cars, a couple of manufacturers at times, and now it's embraced. Now we've got 10 active GT3 manufacturers on the playing field at the same time. Now, as we look at this weekend's race, and it kind of has a symmetry to what we saw at Lime Rock a couple of months ago, we've got 18 cars on the field this weekend. We've got 5 in Pro and 13 in GTD. So I'd say that's the one caveat to it, is that the Pro ranks is a little bit slim. We're going to lose the RLL car next year as they turn their attention to their prototype campaign. And how do we make that shift? And I think there's some things on board for next year that may change that. We were all waiting at the kind of State of the Union address at Road America to see what they were going to do with the driver gradings, because that's really a key component to that, Greg. And even though we thought they may step back and make it a bronze mandate in GTD, they've stuck with the silver mandate. And we're going to have to see how that plays out with the shift potentially coming with how the FIA are going to grade drivers coming up in 2023.
Well, that leads into a very good discussion point. Just one observation for those who may not be real familiar with GT Le Mans or GTE. For a relatively minor increase in performance over a GT3 car, the cost was huge to be able to achieve it. So it was very much a sensible move in terms of cost reduction and financial stability and achievability for some of these teams to be able to continue in the sport. But as you said, kind of some interesting news coming out of the new FIA ranking system with some input, it should be noted, from SRO, who, of course, are the people that created the GT3 category in that homologation. But that interesting tidbit you mentioned for IMSA, not having a bronze-only mandate, which would mean you'd have to have a bronze in the GTD car, in the Pro-Am car, leaving that option to have a silver in that car instead of a bronze has changed things up. But the new rankings are going to have a big effect on what we've lovingly come to call over the years super silvers.
Right. And as you read the new regulations, how they've been laid out and highlighted, the devil is in the detail always. But as I read it, I'd say that any good racing driver with a pulse is going to be a gold. So there's going to be a shift. So I think if you look at the IMSA championship right now, with drivers like Madison Snow, Robert McGuinness, possibly Robbie Foley, Roman DeAngelis, you'd have to think, reading the regulations for next year, they're probably going to be bumped up to gold. So then you get to a situation, do they then become a lead driver in a Pro-Am lineup and stay in GTD? Or do teams like Paul Miller Racing with Brian Sellers, Madison Snow, Turner Motorsports with Billy Orble and Robbie Foley move up to that pro class? I think that's what's going to happen. And I think if they then embrace that, I think if you then look at, okay, what's the symmetry now if we were going to a GT-only event next year, instead of having 5 pro cars and 13 GTD cars, we may have 9 and 9. So I think that will make it a better show for us, better for TV to talk about. And I think the other domino effect is that even though there's still silvers allowed, I think for the Rob Ferrials, the Ryan Hardwicks, the John Potters of the world, I think they're going to be more comfortable staying and competing. And I think that's also going to entice other true gentleman drivers, even if they may still be called a silver, to come and play in this championship. And I think it really relates to what's happened in LMP2. When they went to the bronze mandate, it took a while to get traction, but this year, Greg, there's been a really healthy P2 field because a lot of the European teams are finally, post-COVID, we're still in the COVID era a little bit, but the pandemic stages where you couldn't travel very well. It's now boosting that field. So I think that's a win-win. It's going to take a little bit of a time to settle out. There's still going to be some consternation in terms of a Formula Racing. Do I want to go and compete against Corvette Racing? But I think they have all of the tools in place, certainly the team structure, the engineering expertise. And I think when you talk about a Brian Sellers and a Madison Snow, yes, you're going up against Garcia and Jordan Taylor. That's tough, but they can certainly compete, as we've seen so often this year, with GTD cars fully mixed up with the pro cars, and they're all got the same spec cars, same spec tires. So it should make it a very easy move to that pro class.
Well, and on occasion this year, we've seen GTD Pro-Am cars finish ahead of the top finishing GTD Pro category. And I like that idea of, okay, cars are equal, and it gives the opportunity for a quote unquote Pro-Am program to have that overall class win, which is kind of exciting. And I like that continuation of that. I think, as you pointed out, it's a really good point when you're looking at a true bronze driver being perhaps a little tentative about saying, yeah, I want to come in and fund a program, going up against teams like the Paul Miller Racing duo, who are very, very talented, and certainly the Vassar Sullivan AM car. There's some really, really tough drivers in there. So I see that point. The other thing to me, Cal, that I think is going to have a relatively big role is just because a guy who was in his earlier life a factory driver of great skill, just because they hit 60, they're not bronze anymore automatically. So you can't have one of those guys that in a way is a bit of a ringer. That'll be down up against the bronze drivers. I think that too is going to open up that Pro-Am category.
I think it will, Greg. I mean, a lot will come out this off-season when they take the list of drivers, they try and use their new kind of formula, their new framework, and who gets shifted, who does not. You've then got this mandatory age downgrade that was at 50, 55, and 60 for bronze ultimately. And how they incorporate that, I think it's going to be more performance-driven. I don't think it's any longer a guarantee. I think the 50-year-old downgrade may go away, 55-year-old may stay. So then you got to look at who's in which category and getting that downgrade, what do they drop into? So again, lots to work out, but I think everyone has the same intention here. We're really just trying to boost the field, make it enticing for gentlemen drivers to come in. I mean, we have this framework in driver gradings, we have BOP to entice manufacturers and drivers who are funding the majority of these programs to come in and feel they can compete. You still got to do your job right. You still got to focus. You're not just going to show up and drive for 10 minutes any longer. There's minimum drive times. You got to play your part, but you got to make it to a point where they feel if they do everything right and they invest and they tick all of the boxes, that they do have a shot of a podium at least.
And as you said, it's all about trying to increase participation, have more teams, more manufacturers involved. And it looks like that's the eye on the ball that certainly IMSA has right now. Let's look at the World Endurance Championship, WEC. The GTE category will continue to run through next year, but at the end of that, it will be a single spec GT category based on GT3 regulations. And everybody was excited because, we've got the convergence in the prototype ranks for the top tier with Hypercar and GTP now in IMSA. Everybody thought, well, we're going to have that in WEC for GT, but hang on a minute. Here comes WEC and the ACO with this premium kit that they want to have at the cost of potentially $100,000 to bolt on the car. And what it really sounds like when you look through what the idea is just to have them look different. One, does this make any sense to you?
Well, I see both sides of it. I mean, to me, the beauty of having the GT3 formula is you can take the same spec car and run it anywhere. And with WEC moving to that formula for 2024, it's plug and play. I understand from the World Endurance Championships perspective, they want this GT class to be something a little bit more special. So they want it to look slightly differently. They want to put their twist on it, which I get, and there's two sides of looking at that. But I think for the amount of money that it's going to take, I don't think it's going to be a massive redevelopment of the race car. They're going to try and keep the body kit down to 50 to 100,000 for the teams, which sounds to you and I sounds like a lot of money, but in the overall scheme of things, to be able to compete at Le Mans at the premier or one of the premier 24-hour races that's the price of admission. I think the teams will be willing to do that. I think, again, devil in the detail is whenever you bolt anything on aerodynamically at Le Mans going down the Mulsanne several times at 180 miles an hour, it's going to have an effect. So you've got to do it correctly. You don't want to suddenly have teams that are very equal in terms of balance of performance with their manufacturers coming in, and then suddenly, because you strap on this piece of aero kit, they're at a disadvantage or an advantage when you get to that big race. So if you do it right, I think the manufacturer will be willing to invest, maybe, say it costs a couple of million to do it, and then they're going to get some of that return by selling the kits to their various customer teams. They're willing to do that. They understand the place in history that Le Mans has. They want to compete on that stage. And if you look at what they were doing previously to compete with GT Le Mans, it was tens of millions of dollars. So it's still a pretty good price of admission, I feel.
And you bring up a good point, though, that it's $100,000 if it stays within that window to the teams. It's a lot more for that manufacturer in terms of development. So it'll be interesting to see what their take on that is. And the other side of it is, as you said, if you're going down the Mulsanne at those speeds and you've got other bits bolted onto the car, it's going to have an effect. So to me, that means then that we may end up with a Le Mans only BOP package. That again is going to change things up. And the problem is that if you've got a team that just wants to come for Le Mans, they spend that money, then they got to take all that stuff off, go back to whatever their original FIA mandated GT3 BOP is to go race in these other series. So I understand the idea behind it. But at this stage, it seems to me, a little convoluted, maybe unnecessary. But then again, as you said, the price of admission for Le Mans, that is an absolute marquee event. And it's going to be interesting to see how things play out. But now let's get back to what's happening here. At this stage, you could take a GT3 car and in 2024, with that upgrade, go race it in the World Endurance Championship and still be able to race it anywhere else. At its base, that's a good thing. Now, the WEC category, starting in 2024, will be Pro-Am only. So we're not going to have an all-pro GT class anymore at Le Mans, are we?
No, that's changing rapidly. And as I understand it in the rules, there is a bronze mandate to run at Le Mans. So if there's anyone sneaking under the radar with a bronze grading alongside their license for Le Mans 2024, they are going to have their phones ringing off the hook. So again, there's lots to play. It's always difficult, Greg. There's always a pro and a con, right, to any change. And I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. Let's put it that way, in terms of making all of these decisions and getting it right every time.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I'll tell you one thing: GT Le Mans in IMSA and GTE Pro in WEC have produced over the years some absolutely phenomenal racing. And to me, it's a mistake not to have a all-pro GT category at Le Mans. It's special. The pros should have an opportunity to run against each other, in my opinion, at Le Mans. And to me, then, big kudos to IMSA for recognizing we want to have a category for the pros and to have pro-only programs, but keeping the rules identical to the Pro-Am category. To me, we've seen that play out in SRO in World Challenge back in the day, when you get that period when it's all pros in those cars. The racing is off the hook. And I think IMSA wise to be having that kind of forward thinking.
I agree, mate. It's been some fun racing this year. I'm looking forward to this weekend. I think the one thing, just a quickie in terms of the strategy, I think what was learned by the GTD Pro cars at Lime Rock was, if you go on an alternate strategy, before, when you had GT Le Mans speed, you could cut through that GTD traffic and get back that track position. And we saw the Corvette racing team doing it, going to a 3-stopper there. That backfired immediately, because you come out in a bundle of GTD traffic and you're running the same speeds, you have the same spec car. So it's really changed the dynamic there in that pro class. And I think teams learn from that at Lime Rock, and I'm sure they'll adapt a different strategy here this weekend at VIR.